just 2 minutes and we'll start. Marathon and the greatest chess club in the world, the Mechanics Institute. Tonight we're going to talk a bit about Magnus's triumphant return to, well, he's never been down, but he was sort of equal with the top players in the world, and here he had a resounding victory in the Tata Steel tournament of Vikonsay. We'll also talk about what happened to Vladimir Kramnik, who had a very surprising tied for last finish in this Tata Steel tournament and suddenly announced his retirement from competitive chess. And we'll also talk a bit about Sam Shanklin's wonderful endgame and his result in the Tata Steel tournament. And I always like to show at least one game from the Tuesday night marathon, some of our interesting club players. But with that, we are going to start with Magnus. And last week we had seen how he ground down Anand in an endgame, and he was in first place there by half a point. But right on his heels was Anish Giri, who had become famous for drawing so many games. But Giri has fought back, and his rating's almost 2,800 again. Last year he was in a tie with Magnus for first place, and Giri lost the playoff. This year he was the one chasing Magnus, so Magnus had to try to win his later games. Here he had white against Jan Krzysztof Duda from Poland, a very young up-and-coming player, only 20 years old. Magnus had white, starts with the D-pawn, and they get a Queen's Gambit declined, with pawn to d5. Duda takes, and Magnus plays aggressively. Duda pins, and Magnus simply takes his pawn back, gambiting the pawn on e4, and then castles. This is a little like the old gambits, where white just develops, gets all his pieces out. You know, black can win a pawn or two, but it gets very dangerous. This is theory at this point. And Duda decides to play a bit safely and simply retreats with the knight.
What's wrong with taking the other knight?
You can. You can.
At that level, I guess, it's more dangerous.
Yes.
And just winning a pawn.
This will get very complicated here. Take another pawn. Maybe the rook comes to b1, and you could castle, but then all of these white pieces are headed towards the king side. It's going to be quite an attack coming up.
Because the knight goes out and the rook
But
comes over.
you see, castle, knight out, bishop, rook over.
Yeah.
So this would get very complicated.
Messy.
For only 2 pawns exile.
Yes, of course that's a lot at their level, but still that's a lot of a big lead in development. So, Duda played safer, just retreating the knight. He's not yet castled. And check on the bishop on d4, the knight defends it. Knight to e5, rook to b8. So knight takes knight, pawn takes, that's defended. This is still theory, and I believe this is a new move from Magnus, just holding the center. And now after doing the castles,
What move are they on?
this is now move 11 for white. He now takes the knight, doubling the pawns, and grabs the pawn on a7. So at this point, pawns are even. Black has double pawns, but they do control the center. The queen is a little offside there, but of course it's attacking the rook. Duda guards the rook. Queen tries to come back to a good square. Pawn to c5 to undouble the pawns. Retreat with the queen. Pawn takes. Rook takes d4. And an interesting position. Perhaps Magnus had it beforehand in his preparation. Bishop c5. And a very aggressive move. Rook to h4. Now, here it would be more circumspect to take some more control of the center. Duda doesn't like this possibility of bishop g5, puts the pawn here on h6. And we all know Magnus is such an endgame master. But with the tournament on the line, look what he does. Boom. Sacrifices the bishop on h6. And probably you'd think of that, you know, you're going to get two pawns on the king side, action happening over there. Of course, these players, 28-40 for Magnus, 27-50 for Duda, they are calculating everything. It's not just intuition. Thinking about this deeply. And Duda, of course, has to take the bishop, and Magnus chases that h-pawn. Just the queen and the rook, figuring to come down, looks really dangerous for the black side. So Duda has calculated this, and he's got a clever defense. Knight comes back to h7, and looks difficult. Queen takes h6. Does anyone see Duda's defense here? Queen takes rook would stop the checkmate. You would get some points for that, but Wasim, you would lose your queen then.
But did I lose in the game?
Yeah, better than being checkmated. Anybody else?
Check,
F6 or
king
F5?
takes, queen check, queen takes, knight takes.
Ranata, very, very good. When she says check, there is one check in the position, so I know she means bishop takes f7 check, just like a 2750 player.
I did not see it.
King takes, queen to f, and notice you had to take the bishop because it was going to take your rook. Queen f6 check, so you get to trade the queens. And so Duda thought, this is wonderful. Queen takes queen, and before he takes it, he even throws in a little nuance here. Rook takes the pawn check. Okay, get an extra pawn, and king retreats, you take your queen, and we can count the material at this point. Of course, these players were counting the material 6 moves ago. They know exactly how it ends up, and you can see it ends up even. Nice endgame, 3 pawns each, 2 rooks, knight, and bishop.
But
So-
Magnus has the passer back by your wood.
Well, there's the passer. This one's also passer. It's a long ways to go. That's maybe one factor. There's a bigger factor, though. One problem that Duda didn't expect. Well, it's that this king is still airy over here.
Knight to E4.
Well, he did simply rook to F1 on this knight. And if the knight moves, the other rook can come to G4 check. Well, the king came up, just defend the knight. Looks pretty good. But now rook to F3 and rook G3 check is a big problem. Yeah, you think you get to an endgame and you're out of the woods, but still in trouble. Okay, Duda has to safeguard his king. Rook G3 checks a big threat, so he plays rook G8. The king can come back to F8. But now problems on the F file. If the knight moves, you take on F7 check. Here. And at this point, it's some real trouble. Duda plays the best defense, which is try to break up these rooks. And he loses the bishop and knight for the 2 rooks, but he thinks his active rook on B2 will help him out. Of course, anybody else would think, oh no, I'm down material against Magnus in the endgame, that this isn't going to end well. And, well, it didn't. The game continues a long time. I think we'll pass over the rest of it sort of quickly, because each move Magnus just consolidates a little more and slowly moves forward. It went rook to D8, rook to F2, B4, bishop B5. Use the pawn to take some squares. Hopefully he takes it, then you double bishop came to E2, 5, 3. Actually, those pawns looked rather dangerous for quite a while. On to E5. 92. It's hard to maneuver these pieces and make them work cohesively. But the knight here helps to stop those center pawns. Rook to the A file, and now this is a danger, as Guy was pointing out earlier. B1. Yeah, if rook comes here, you defend the bishop and fork the rooks. On to E4. But now you stop them, and those pawns are stationary. And white starts to move forward.
Now you have a pawn on each side.
B8. Actually, they repeated moves once, but I won't do that. 6. Now, if the pawn comes to c3, well, the bishop's got some good squares then. Knight checks. And here it's been a lot of maneuvering. We saw this position about 20 moves ago, and you saw Magnus unravel, stop these pawns, get his king to a safe square, advance these pawns. You know, masterful endgame technique. But now he finishes it off with active play, rook to b1. So the rook comes here, check. And it loses the pawn on h5, but then bishop takes e4, so pawn takes e4, rook to b5 check will win the rook on h5. So this is really about the end. Rook e8, knight attacks the h5 rook, check. King, actually instead of taking king to d4, but you see the king, rook, bishop, and knight, they're controlling the center of the board. This pawn's doomed. Now it's getting easy for anyone, even if they're not Magnus. Check. King g8. Knight takes c4, and now I think we'll stop at this point with the bishop, knight, and extra pawn. The best that Duda could get would be to trade the rooks, sacrifice a rook for this pawn, but I expect most of you know how to checkmate with bishop and knight, and certainly Magnus does. So this was the last game he had to win, and the last round he had black against Geary, but made an easy draw and finished in clear first. His rating's up to 2845, and he's soundly #1 in the world, and unquestionably the best player in classical chess, or blitz chess, or rapid chess. But other things have been happening in the chess world. And maybe now we'll get on to Sam Shanklin. Well, in fact, Sam was the one who played Vladimir Kramnik in the last round of the tournament in Tata Steel. So just a note about Kramnik there. We'll show the position that they reached. Kramnik had been pressing for most of the game. There's a little back and forth.
Who is what color?
Shanklin had black, Kramnik had white.
Thanks.
Well, it's this position here Kramnik had been trying to win. He's got an extra bishop, 2 pawns less, but these pawns are dangerous on this side of the board. And in the old days, when Kramnik played Kasparov for the World Championship, and Kasparov couldn't win a single game against him, there was Kramnik's sense of danger, and he simply wouldn't lose a game, especially an end game. But here, he's having a bad tournament. He's -3 or 4 in the tournament, competing for last place, and he wants to win. So he moves the bishop here rather than bishop takes and rook takes with a dead draw, 3 pawns against 3 pawns. And Sam pushes the pawn. Kramnik can't resign himself to a drawn position. Bishop takes, pawn, rook takes b2. So he presses. Bishop to here, and now these pawns, they're advancing, and when they're that far down, you always have a lot of problems preventing them from queening. King, pawn. King tries to get over, but Sam just cuts him off. And this bishop, well, it's not much of a bishop, it's just stopping that pawn from advancing. And this position's lost for white. So nothing really white can do that's active, and black will just advance. Looks a little difficult for black to advance here, but these pawns are so deadly, Sam just checks with the rook. And hoping Vladimir will take it, and there's no way to stop pawn to a2 and a queen. Kramnik didn't take it, but that just delayed the end. Comes to d3 anyway. Now the black king can come in to help. So nothing works for white. Kramnik gets a little desperate. And the final breakthrough here. Sam pushes the pawn to f4. So, big trouble. If you take this pawn, then rook c1, because when these rooks get traded, rook takes, pawn takes, king takes, then the h-pawn just runs for a touchdown. Well, no way out. Bishop a2, but check. Takes, check, and now he's got a very unpleasant choice. Either king to f3 when it's checkmate, or king down and the rook gets skewered. So a bit of a sad end to Vladimir Kramnik's career, but it very much helped Sam. Sam won his last 2 games, finished in the middle of the tournament and gained a few rating points. It was a good debut for Sam in another super tournament.
Is this his highest rated tournament that he played?
Yes, he played in the U.S. Championship, and that was quite high rated, but this was even higher rated. And
Do you happen to know how many points he gained?
only about 3 or 4. So nothing so good, but he had been losing some games. and now he bounces back. He's 15 points behind Nakamura, so he might soon be number 3 in the United States.
Were you going to talk about his game against Geary?
That is right up next, yes. Now, yeah, not all went well for Sam in this tournament, and we had the game where he played Anish Giri. Giri had the white pieces. Pawn on B7, knight on B4, so B4, and he just moved the pawn to B6. Yes, this was Giri's last move. So I assume by now most of you know the story, but anybody who doesn't know the story, tell me a move for Sam who has the black side. And see if it's better than Sam's move.
You're fine, right?
Okay, yes, that's the story. In this position, Sam resigned. As you probably know by now, this is a drawn position. So what's going on, you see the knight here is completely trapped. And you can try to win this pawn. Well, actually it's guarded. And the knight doesn't help trying to escape down here. You even still guard that pawn. You have 2 pawns in case you would lose one. And Sam thought, oh, well, maybe the king could run over here and get stalemated. But the bishop can cut him off so that the king can't make it into the corner. And Sam saw this far and decided to resign. But some of you know the story, yes?
I was thinking maybe the king can go to c4 and then b5 and attack both pawns at the same time, while the bishop can maybe go to c5 and protect them, but then that might lead to a better stalemate, I think.
Well, okay, I could tell you what, I'll even just defend one. I don't know which one. Actually, it'd be, no, I'll let you take which one you like.
Let's take the 4th rank one.
Okay, I'm going to be able to defend the other pawn. And this is just lost.
And then to a6. King
Yes,
to a6.
but it doesn't matter. You can't stay here.
Okay, there's no.
You have to move and there's no stalemate. So maybe it's not completely silly to resign there. You're behind, you see your knight is trapped. You've been struggling in a long 5-hour game, a little depressed and Now the point is that when after white takes the knight, or white has 2 pawns or 1 pawn, whatever, as long as he's got the pawn on b6, you simply put your king on c8. And maybe cuts you off or not, doesn't matter. Your plan is simply king to c8, king out, and if he stops you from coming out, it's stalemate. If you move away, your next move is always king to c8. If he stops you, it's stalemate even though you're not in the corner. So maybe you haven't heard the end of the story. Sam was coming back. He's actually playing for our pro chess team tonight.
All right. Is this one about the SFO?
And he comes into SFO, where you have immigration. And so there he meets the immigration officer, and the fellow says, "Do me a favor, never resign in a drawn position again." Sam says, "Okay, sure." And the guy says, "Welcome to America." So if you get stuck in immigration, lose your passport, or coming through the wall in the Mexican border, just tell the fellow, "I'm never going to resign in a drawn position. I'm sure I'll let you in the country."
So that means we have CTV officers who play chess. Maybe we should invite them here someday.
Apparently we should.
Interesting.
Now, I always like to show something of our great Tuesday night marathon tournament. We're not quite as good as Magnus and Sam and the others. Well, sometimes, of course, we're better, but you know, the average we don't do quite as well. But the chess is always entertaining. There's kind of different openings. People always play to win. Sort of funny things happen. And I will pick different games from all of you as we go throughout the weeks. If you happen to have a really good game, please tell me. I kind of read them over in my head, and so I find something, but you'll know if something special happened. And in case I miss it, be sure to alert me. So tonight we'll look at Albert Starr against Richard Newey. They're not here tonight yet, unfortunately.
Star white.
Starr was white, yes.
Was his opponent higher rated?
Was
Was his opponent higher rated?
well, in fact, the ratings are kind of close. As we have here, I think Albert is 1,500 and Richard Newey is 1,600. So that's kind of about average for our tournament here. Now, instead of your theoretical Queen's Gambit decline, Sicilians or something, Albert plays pawn to e3. Okay, it's a fair move. It's white can do a lot of things, get into a position you like. And Richard Newey just plays principally taking the center. So now pawn to d3 from Albert, which when someone plays that, you say, well, I know that's not theoretically best. You know, it's kind of slow. It doesn't take control of the center, gives black a free hand. But it's not a bad move. You get a position. And one thing is, often you play against somebody, they have their special systems. They like to get their kind of openings, even if they're a little worse. Some people play the bird. I've forgotten who the player of that is. Jerry Morgan?
Jerry Morgan.
Okay. So, okay, Albert just chooses his way. But Richard Newey, he charges forward just as you're supposed to do. To d2, knight f6, knight f3, bishop d6, e2.
And white, is white just, is this just, is there a name for the white system, or is it just kind of ad hoc, or what?
I think that's a good name, ad hoc. If I put this in modern chess openings, I'll use ad hoc system. Yes, I've actually never seen this before for white, but not the exact position like this. And it's a little dangerous but you might get into a sort of Alyekin's defense, Black has a bit of initiative here. Bit of space, bit of initiative. So I wouldn't like this so much as the white side, but some people are very comfortable with this position. And then some people, when they have this side, they're nervous. Should I advance? Should I not advance? Okay, Richard does a good job though. He uses the C pawn, take a bit more control. Castles. Now once again, E4 could be played. But castles, you can hardly go wrong if you castle, develop all your pieces, take the center. And B3, this is a little like Bent Larson used to play in the old days. Or Nimzovich, where you cede the center, but you attack it from the flank. Knight C6. Again, this is good. You don't have to calculate, you don't have to think if you get the pieces out. As soon as you start some advance, you're going to have to calculate, see if your pawn's going to get weak. You might think it's good, and it probably is, but when you enter tactics, things can happen. Here, though, Albert makes a move that's a little too provocative. Now just develop like Larson, but he goes G3 on the other side of the board, some sort of symmetrical method. So you could come with the bishop, you could advance, but Richard just waits, develop once again. Bishop to B2, and bishop H3, so that's a little annoying, but he's got a space for his rook. So again, complications with this move. And here's just a simple developing move. It's hard to go too wrong with that. But, okay, it looked like this bishop was causing a lot of trouble. It's under attack now. And where are you going to put it? You could come to F5, well, E4 at least hits back in the center. So, okay, this is good. You've got these white squares a little weak. Doesn't hurt if you trade off the white squared bishops. And takes. We would have ourselves a normal type of game here. White has a bit more space, but white's developed. You could summon a queen F3. You could attack the light squares in the center, sort of King's Indian reversed. But it's well done what Richard knew he did. You've gotten your pieces out, take the center, you're ready for action. And here Albert gets a little impatient. He decides to charge in the center. The thing that's happened is black has developed and taken his squares, so he's got the advantage when the action happens, which is now. He could in fact take, and knight e3 would cause some trouble here. It looks like there's activity with the queen, but you can push off the knight. He does instead another logical move, pawn to h6 to chase that knight away, just to be safer. Albert takes, bishop takes. And now it's trouble. Bishop e5, rook e5. And the classical play is one out here with everything developed, things safe, and a weak square on e3. So black wins a pawn. Knight f1 takes. Rook e8, queen to d2, and rook e6. Maybe rook e1 would be a better defense. I mean, first covers some squares, and then white or black doubles on the file. So now Albert counters on the E file, and comes a nice maneuver. Knight e5 with this big threat of forking everything on the f3 square. So quite some trouble. He takes. Oh, I'm sorry, he didn't take. He played rook to e3 simply to guard the f3 square. So just a bit of a tactical exercise to get you warmed up for your game this evening. How does black win?
Rook against rook, and then the rook goes on.
Sorry, it's black's move. You wanted to move this rook?
No, knight. The black knight hits the white knight.
You take this.
Yeah.
And the rook takes it.
And then he goes rook to, doesn't he go to rook,
Rook e2. That would be, and looks like you would, yeah, queen f4. Looks like you'd win another pawn probably, but.
But someone takes puts them.
But someone I heard suggested a knockout move here. Well, this knight is guarding the e3 rook. Thank you, Wasim. An overload on the f3 square. If the rook moves away, you get the fork. The knight takes the knight, you take the rook on the queen. And that was essentially it for the game. He had to sacrifice the exchange, but knight takes, rook takes. Well, it was an exchange and a pawn down, and I won't finish this for you, but you can see this in the newsletter, as we put all the games in the newsletter now. But I think none of you would have trouble with the technique here. So, one more game from the Tata Steel event. Instead of a long Magnus endgame, one from one of the young Dutch players, Jordan van Foris. And he tied for last with Vladimir Kramnik, but he played some very interesting games, and he had a big impact on the final standings. As in the 11th round, or I think it was 10th round, he was playing one of the co-leaders, Napal Niachi, from Russia. Often the strategy is you play very safely against the top-ranked players and you figure you have to beat the low-ranked players if you're going to win the tournament. But here, Jordan Van Forest was white, and Nepomniachtchi was black, so they had a Sicilian defense. Clearly, when you play c5, you're ready to rumble. You get an imbalanced position. And Nepomniachtchi plays the Najdorf defense. Back in Fischer's day, everybody would play bishop to g5. Very tactical, complicated, but people have worked out their defenses, especially with the computer. And Van Forest plays pawn to h3, this simple little move, just taking some squares here. Sometimes the pawn will go to g4, and this has become a system as much as any other against the Najdorf. So both players play quite principally, get the pieces out. F4. Just classical setup in the Najdorf against the slower systems. But now a very aggressive move by Van Forest, queen e2, because he just wants to castle long. So we get a very aggressive position here, threatening pawn to e5. Black will attack on the queen side and white attack on the king side. And g5 with the advance. White has a little more space and is a little ahead in the race, so has gotten some advantage from this opening. There was an excellent game of Magnus against Nakamura about 4 or 5 years ago in this Tata Steel tournament, where Magnus had a similar plan from the white side, take a bit more control of the center and advance. But oftentimes black's able to crash through on the queen side too. The game becomes very complex. Double on the C line. And black is completely developed, but white has a very slow plan that when it finally gets there will do something. You want to just break up the king side so there's some targets. Block. And you have to be careful with the tactics on the C line. Now, knight to e5, threatening pawn to b4 and winning this pawn on c2 with check. It's funny about these Sicilians, each piece can counterbalance one of the others. So this one moves away, this is weak, but now that that's gone, this white knight gets to come to d4 and guard the c2 pawn. And the knights are headed to c4, trying to cause trouble around the black king here. Now the one piece not doing anything for the white side is this bishop. So a nice move, just get it in play, try to break down the squares here in the center. Knight C4, and black has threats. Knight A3 check. Maybe some others. So he, well, I'm sorry, it was the knight on E2. C4. So he removes the target on C3, jumping into D5, takes, knight B6, because everything was well guarded here. So this pawn on D5 is loose, but still white's got what he wants. This knight kind of close to the king side, very safe king, these pawns that can advance. And then Forrest simply retreats, sacrificing this pawn, and then prepares for the assault. White's a pawn down, but clearly he's ahead in the race of opening lines against the king. And we reach the critical point soon. So bishop f8 to open lines to get the black pieces into the game. And pawn to g6. Black tries to close things up. Pawn to h6. Now, white might do better simply opening things immediately, but he plays queen g2. He's got all these ideas here of the knight hopping in, breaking this up, some sacrifices. And black has really only one good defense to move the knight out of take. But he was very afraid of knight to f5, with plans of like knight takes h6 and double check in one order. You could probably hang on with rook to e6. But that's a computer variation. Instead, he played knight to f6, and here all the fun begins. So, I leave it to you to make suggestions. White to play, how should we continue the attack?
Take a pawn.
We have 2 pawns we can take.
Take a pawn with chess.
Take the pawn with check. Okay, could do that. Take it with the queen, I think, rather than the king. You could try knight f5 instead. It's going to be a dangerous attack. They're all pretty dangerous. He actually plays the best move according to the computer. Immediately takes this pawn. Okay, you still have this possibility, knight f5. You certainly don't want to take this bishop because of double check. Well, it's not going to last long. So, Nepomniachtchi's in some trouble. He decides to take this pawn. Well, now if you take it back, then looks like you could take the bishop on h6. So, he gets another piece in the attack. The one guy who's not really helping right now, look on D to f1. Okay, this one's, as you can see, could likely help on the H file. You've got the bishop, the pawn, queen and knight. All sorts of things attacking, but it's getting very complicated. plays queen to c4. Okay, all of these are over here, but the center's a little loose. And now comes rook takes f6. Well, you can't really take the rook because a queen takes g6 check, rook to g1. So he takes the knight on d4. And this is good that all of black's pieces are being very active. The bishop's defending here, rook's on the open line, queen's in the center. And if you're playing a game like this, it's so easy to go wrong with the white side. One little slip and the black pieces just come out. Here, Van Forest took the pawn on e4, or pawn on g6, but then came queen to, excuse me, I have to get this. Rook takes g, he can't do queen e4 because of rook takes pawn check. So he did king to h7, threatening to take the bishop. And the bishop had to retreat back to c1. And then came queen to e4 with all the black pieces very active, defending against this for the moment. So white needed a good move here. And can we get a suggestion from someone? Well, that was very quick, but with 5 minutes left, exactly. Pawn to h6. And you have to calculate the tactics here. So the first question is, what if I just take your queen? What's that?
Take the queen.
Take the queen, and I will take your pawn.
And then rook takes.
I have a bishop guarding this. And I'm going to be able to defend with rook to e6. But Mike, you were exactly right, because after queen takes the queen, you wouldn't take back. You would go double check.
Double check.
Oh, excuse me. Only one. It feels like a double check.
Oh, any mate. Okay.
Well, yeah, not such an easy mate. If the queen takes the rook, then it's mate. So you'd have to take, and then you get a queen, and you run the king all around. And you'll believe me when I check this out on the computer. That,
Oh, as fair as you could play queen d7, which was
yes, as long as you've got that covered square. That square covered. But this does lead to mate. He tried something else after that pawn to h6, which must have come as quite a shock. You finally feel you're defending, and then your opponent hits you with such a shock. Thank you. He did,
what about queen takes rook?
No, do they check?
pawn to, queen to e4. And queen takes rook, and that's exactly what happened. And he He took check. King takes. Bishop checks. You have to guard the queen. You don't want to go to the H file.
Check with the rook.
Check with the rook. Very good, Renata. Now, to move the king, you take that, so the queen has to interpose. And then queen d5 check. And now that's basically the end of the game. If rook e6, you get to take the queen check and win the rook there. So instead he played king to e7, but after bishop to g5, white was up material and with the attack. The game lasted about 10 moves longer or something, but he easily won with the extra queen. Okay, thank you.
Please check the pairings on the wall. Every adjustment that was made was the result of your opponent canceling.